therefore support this application and support my colleague.
Thank you very much. So I think we've had a proposer and a seconder. So unless anyone wishes to speak at this point, yes, please read out the recommendation for us.
Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of those watching the webcast, we have had an internet failure in the entire building, but the webcast is now live again. So for the benefit of those watching, the debate has taken place on the Collar Street item, and we now have a proposal from Councillor Wendy Randall that is seconded by Councillor Ken Pritchard, that the officer's recommendation as set out in the report with the necessary agreements be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak? All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? One. Thank you very much. The proposal's carried. Item 9, the Gardens, 3 Hodges Lane, Kislingbury.
That's the entire.
Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a brief verbal update. It's just a couple of corrections for the report. Paragraph 7.23 states that the finished floor level will be set 1.5 metres above the natural ground level. However, taking into account the flood levels subsequently agreed, as per the part of the report that deals with the consultees, as agreed by the EA, the actual finished floor level would be 1.15 metres above the natural ground level, given that the flood level was 85 centimetres and the finished floor level would need to be set 30 centimetres above that. And another sort of small point is 3.1.1 refers to extensions and improvements to 3 Hodges Lane and says that they are pending. That's actually been approved and implemented. So just a couple of corrections there. Thank you, Chair. The application relates to a parcel of land at the end of Hodges Lane within the village of Kislingbury, as shown outlined in red here. The site is within the settlement confines. It is surrounded on all sides by built form, with the Cromwell Public House, a Grade 2 listed building, directly to the north of the site, and residences which front Hodges Lane, Beach Lane and Hall Close, all surrounding the application site. So the site itself is also within the Kislingbury Conservation Area. This application is seeking outline permission with all matters other than access being reserved for a subsequent reserved matters application, and therefore any plans for the development are indicative at this stage. It should be noted that although it benefits from flood defences, the northern part of Kislingbury is prone to flooding. The site itself is within flood zones 2 and 3, as I will show you in later slides. So we're going to whiz through some photos. So these were taken the day of the site visit on Tuesday. So I'll quickly whiz through these. So this is the access to the site here. This is 3 Hodges Lane, and then the development is proposed to take place behind this this garage. And this is 3 Hodges Lane, which, like I said, has been recently renovated and extended. The indicative plans show the dwellings here. This is a closer up of the proposed location of the dwellings. And again, looking southwards. Again, looking southwards, but along the eastern boundary. From the southern part of the site, looking back towards the access. So the access is behind this garage here. This is from the southern part of the site looking north. So you can see there's some trees here in the application site. So flood zones. So as members will be aware, there's 3 broad categories of flood zone. Flood zone 1 is a negligible risk of flooding. Flood zone 2, the risk is between a flood event will happen between 1 in 100 years and 1 in 1,000 years. And then flood zone 3, the flood risk is at least 1 in 100 years. So obviously some areas may be significantly lower than that. It should be noted that dwellings are considered to be a more vulnerable use and are therefore not appropriate in flood zone 3. Development in flood zone 3 must be subject to the sequential test set out in the NPPF to consider if there are suitable alternative sites which would deliver the same benefit but be less prone to flooding. In this case, the application originally sought 3 new dwellings, but officers' view is that the applicant has passed the sequential test by reducing this this to 2 dwellings and citing them solely within flood zone 2. It should be noted the EA and Lead Local Flood Authority have also been consulted and raised no objection. So just as context to my my discussion there, this is flood zone 3. So the southern part, the northern part of the site is in flood zone 3, which is more prone to flooding. The southern portion of the site is in flood zone 2. And again, this is an indicative drawing, but it shows that they're concentrating the 2 new dwellings solely in flood zone 2. Originally, another dwelling was proposed here. That was in flood zone 3. And as I said, they removed it. So now residential development is only proposed in flood zone 2. Obviously, as members will be aware, Kislingbury is prone to flooding. Obviously, you've got the main river here, and this portion of Kislingbury has been known to flood, including last month. So I haven't taken these photos myself; they're from third parties. Just for clarification, but obviously they show the extent of flooding. So you can see the access is flooded here. As you obviously bearing in mind where flood zone 3 is, obviously the access in flood zone 3, and as you can see, it can flood. This is from the access looking down the public right of way. This is from Hodges Lane looking north on the public right of way adjacent to the pub. This is from Hodges Lane looking west back towards the high street. So the site is behind us. This is from roughly the midpoint of Hodges Lane looking east towards the site. Again, you can see the access is here. And then this is, I believe this is the view of the high street. So just to the north of the Cromwell pub. And I believe this one's from Beach Lane. And then this is the application site itself. Obviously, you can see whilst the ground's being prepared, water is accumulated on the site here as well. Obviously, not to the extent that is shown on the other pictures. It's just the final one of Hodges Lane as well. So just for members' benefit, I will just quickly whiz back to the EA flood maps. So we're principally dealing with Hodges Lane here, the access here, and then the high street up here and Beaches Lane down here in flood zone 3. So I just wanted to provide some context to the photos. So we've then got a indicative site plan. So just to reiterate, the application proposes 2 dwellings, appearance, layout, scale, and landscaping are all reserved matters and therefore not considered as part of this application. And the proposed plans are only indicative at this stage. Access is not a reserved matter and as discussed, will be provided via the existing access. There we go. So we should whiz through the indicative plans again. Okay, and this is an aerial plan showing some of the context of the site. And finally, we have a committee site plan showing the various constraints. So obviously, as I mentioned, there's a public right of way. There's a listed building here, another one here as well. It's in the conservation area. So planning officers have considered the proposed development and are of the view that it would comply with the policies set out in the development plan. Therefore, subject to the reasons set out in the officer report, officers recommend the application is approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And we have Jonathan Hughes on behalf of Kislingbury Parish Council to speak to us.
My name is Jonathan Hughes. I'm Chair of the Kislingbury Parish Council. As you can see from the photos, Hodges Lane, Beach Lane and High Street are the lowest part of the village and are in the flood alert area. They have flooded 3 times in the past week. Raw sewage was forced up out of the foul drain on Hodges Lane. On one day alone last week, 750,000 litres of water were pumped out by Kier into the river, but the level of standing water did not drop by 1 millimetre. We have now had 5 floods in 2024 alone. There are also floods in December 12, January 13, December 13, January 14, February 16, December 20, when the highest level was recorded at 2.16 metres, and December 21. It is evident that flooding events in the village are entirely predictable and that with climate change, they will become more frequent. We have contacted WNC Chief Executive in July this year, pointing out that flooding poses a potential risk to life and property. And we have highlighted how planning decisions have the potential to make a bad situation worse. In the light of actual events seen in those photos, the council argues that the lack of objections to the revised proposal by the Lead Flood Authority must be challenged by this committee. Their suggestion that a larger diameter pipe will make a difference is irrelevant. We could see that the once in 500 years, the once in 100 years is exceeded very, very frequently. They assume that the current drainage system is fit for purpose. It's clearly not. The offer of permeable draining and sub-base storage outside the area at risk is meaningless. The entire area is not just at risk of flooding, it floods regularly. Concern 4 finds that the design now meets the 5% exceedance level. Actual events belie this is adequate to deal with the continued flood risk. LLAFA don't comment on fluvial flood risk. The proposed limitation of the extent of land raising can only worsen a bad situation that currently exists, especially if the roof area of the redeveloped property has been tripled. The LLAFA comments only relate to existing surface water drainage implications of the proposed development. It's vital that surface water drainage for this proposal be placed in the context of a system that doesn't function when the river is too high. Basically, put simply, the drains don't clear the village. So it backs up from the river. It doesn't drain into the water. There's no consideration of that in the proposal. Councillors, please, please, please do not add to the already significant flooding risk by approving this application. Although it's only 2 houses involved in the application, it runs a huge risk of creating a precedent. And I hope you will consider carefully what decision you make tonight. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. If you'd stay there in case of questions from members. Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. Could you go over when, in fact, the history of flooding in Kislingbury?
Well, the history
that you've actually just stated, you know,
okay,
sort of the timings.
the history of the reference was made to the fact that Kislingbury is protected by flood defences.
Yeah.
They were installed at the turn of the century following a flood in 1998. Okay. they reduced the extent of river flooding up the high street.
All I want to know is that the exact dates that you actually just state during your presentation.
Yeah, the exact dates
Yeah.
were Monday, Tuesday of last week,
Yep.
and Thursday and Friday of
And
same
prior,
week.
and prior to that,
And prior to that, December 2012, January 2013,
Yeah.
December 2013, January 2014, February 2016, December, it was actually Christmas Eve, December 2020, and December 2021.
thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. It's quite compelling to hear that. In your experience, in terms of water height and then impact of that, can you give on those dates
Yeah.
a summary of, in
Yeah, sure.
comparison to what you received last week?
I
Development
I actually addressed full council last Thursday, and I explained that on those 3 days, I walked around the effective lanes, including Hodges Lane, right by the entrance of the proposed development, which is in the low risk flood zone, according to the chart. I walked around those. I was just about able to get through with wellies on. So it was sort of knee high, basically. And that's, but the impact it has on people. I mean, people are unable to use their toilets because the rainwater backs up into the foul drains. The Cromwell Cottage had to close their toilets, so they had to close their business. Because the high street was flooding. I mean, you have to, if you don't know Kislingbury, the High Street, Beach Lane, Hodges Lane, all sort of form part of the sort of the basin closest to the river, and the traffic going down there was causing a sort of major wash. You know, attempts were made to close the road with mixed success because people think they have a right to drive through, and so people with adjacent properties were sort of getting wash into their properties.
Yeah.
So two follow-ups there. In terms of the residual, how long did it take to go? And then secondly, just going back into comparisons, I think you said 2012, 2013, the water level then to what you experienced last week. Can you compare those two?
They're much the same, because what happens if the river reaches about 1.7, the escape flaps are closed by the river. So it can't, so it then backs up, so it reaches its level depending on how much rainfall is gathered. The one on the corner of Beach Lane was slightly higher than we'd experienced before. And that's where the pumping of the 750,000 litres in one day had no effect.
Get that back on the screen.
Yeah, can we see a visual of that, please?
So that's, you can see that the houses with the boarded window, that's an extension with the solar panels on. That and the one adjacent to it were extensions from the original house. So that's the triple of the roof areas. So there's already increased runoff. That's the entrance to the site where the metal gate is. The public bridleway is going to the right of the wall, and this is sort of the Hodges Lane. So, and the Cromwell is just out of picture to the left. So there was a complete circle of water that was, in my view, sort of welly deep, that ran up Hodges Lane that you see in the photos, to the High Street, round by the High Street, and through the connecting footpath to the side of the Cromwell.
How long did that take to disperse from that setting?
It's finally been dispersed today.
Okay, so last Monday was, those photos were taken, when were those photos taken?
Those were taken on the first. So it was the Monday before, when the rain started, that the flooding. I was bailing out my garage, I live on Church Lane. I was bailing out my garage for 15 hours with the water coming, backing up, the rainwater backing up into the foul drain.
Yeah, so just for clarity for the committee, how many days did that take to subdue?
That took the week.
Any further questions for our speaker? Councillor Eastwood.
Good evening.
Hello.
Bearing in mind that our Officer James Patterson, together with his group, have reduced the number of houses from 3 to 2.
Mhm.
The presence of 2 houses, would it make any difference as to whether they were built or not? The ultimate problem will actually lie with the real estate agent who's got to sell it.
The point we're making is that those pictures show clearly,
Mhm.
and the history of those dates show clearly, that the flood risk already exceeds the 1 in 5, the 5%, the 1 in 100 years. It already exceeds that. It happens regularly, it happens predictably, and it happens because there's a lack of infrastructure to drain the water away. We have the bund, which was set up in around 2000, but that bund stops the river flooding. But what it doesn't do is deal with the rainwater once the river gets too high. And given that we're expecting high levels of rain, we're sort of saying that the flood risk has already been worsened by the extension of the houses. So it's going to worsen it even further. So we're saying it's going to make a bad situation worse. The mitigation of the level raising means that it won't be, if it's going to be 10% worse, perhaps it's only going to be 5%, but it's still going to be worse. The situation as it stands is not, makes people's lives difficult. It doesn't just affect that area of Hodges Lane, it affects the backing up through the system. So we've had, there's a couple on the corner of Starmers Lane and Church Lane whose house was flooded. She had to come out of hospital to go into a hotel because she couldn't move back to her house. Numerous people weren't able to use their toilets. People are having to sort of bail out. So it has a wider impact, and what we're sort of saying is it may only be 2 houses, it may only be a minimal flood risk, but it's in themselves. But on top of what already exists, we're hoping you find that unacceptable. And also there's an issue of creating a precedent that it's okay to build things that are so close to high risk flood areas.
But what you're saying is that the infrastructure needs to be altered prior to development.
That would certainly help. That would certainly mitigate the risk. If we'd be sort of advised that the only way that's going to change is if we have some way of pumping out that doesn't rely on river clearance. So that, and is there going to be that investment? I would have thought that would be way beyond the remit of a planning committee to say whether that's possible. But and your officer was talking earlier about having to deal with the situation as it is, and he very fairly showed you the picture of the situation as it is. As it is, it floods regularly. It's unusual this year in the sense that it's not a December-January flood; it's a September flood. We've still got the joys of December and January to come.
Well, the good Lord has seen fit to turn the bathwater upside down. So the net result is we've had an enormous amount of rain. I'm sure you will agree. But really, I think we have to address the situation within the village of drainage before looking at this project. Because they're not going to be able to reverse it. Once it's there, it's going to be that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, does anyone else have a question for our speaker? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we have Dave Collins, a local resident. A local resident of Kislingbury?
Speaking on behalf of a local resident.
Ah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair and councillors. I've been instructed by
Is your
local.
mic on? Can you speak closer to
Sorry,
it, please?
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and councillors. I've been asked to make representations on the application by a local resident. As already identified by the case officer, the application site is within the Kissenbury Conservation Area. There are listed buildings nearby, but potentially I don't think they're affected. Number 3, Hodges Lane, which although not mentioned, is, I understand, a non-designated heritage asset and identified in the conservation area appraisal as a notable building. The starting point for consideration of development proposals in conservation areas is set out in paragraph 72 of the Planning Listed Building Conservation Areas Act. And it is the principal concern is that any development proposal should preserve or enhance the character or appearance of that area. With these constraints identified, I'm surprised that an outline application with only access to be considered at this stage was accepted, leaving the scale, appearance, layout and landscaping to be considered as reserved matters. Surely, in such an historic and sensitive environment, these matters should be considered at the starting point for development in a conservation area. The site is currently open and undeveloped. The site does provide openness to the area, which, contrary to the report, is readily appreciated by users of the adjacent public footpath. Additionally, the report in paragraph 37.31 identifies the land as providing a transitional area between the historic village and the more modern development in Beech Lane. If this is the case, the proposed development will undoubtedly remove this traditional space, allowing the new development to encroach within the historic village setting and removing this openness, which clearly adds to the immediate setting of the existing cottage, number 3, Hodges Lane. With regard to the site line in flood areas 2 and 3, National Planning Policy Guidance and Planning Practice Guidance require a sequential approach for the location of new development, the aim of which is to steer new development to areas that have been at the lowest risk of flooding. This guidance could not be clearer. Paragraph 168 states the sequential approach should be used in areas known to be at risk now and in the future from any form of flooding. Development should not be allocated or permitted if there are reasonable alternative sites available for that development to take place. Whilst the report in paragraph 760 sets out that the applicant has considered alternative sites and advances the notion that no other suitable sites exist, I'm unsure how this meets the requirement for the test. Policy SS1 of the policy LH1 of the development plan refer to residential development, recognising that open market housing within the village confines is acceptable. These policies do not just relate to Kissenbury, but the surrounding villages. In Kissenbury itself, there's a large area of undeveloped land off Rogersthorpe Road, adjoining the Spitfire development that recently completed. This land lies within the village confines.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. I must stop you there. Are there any questions for Mr. Collins? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we have Tom Livingston, also a local resident.
So I just clear it up. The opening remarks. Can we do this in the open forum?
What was going on then for the open forum?
No, in the opening remarks, I missed what the new finished floor level was.
Ah, right.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Finished floor level.
sorry, I was just clarifying what the new finished floor levels were, but okay, my name's Tom Livingstone. I'm an engineer. I do flood risk assessments myself. I'm here to speak against this proposal and cut through some of the madness. I wonder if some of you wonder why we're even here, actually. Looking at the photographs, I don't know if many of you are old enough to remember the floods of Easter 1998, when there was massive flooding across this district and, of course, across the country. Well, Mr. Hughes has spoken about a trigger level of 1.7 meters. Now, the top of normal range is 1.89 meters above the normal range of the river. Well, in Easter 1998, the river reached 2.95 meters. And my source for that is volume 2 of the final assessment of the independent review team into the Easter 1998 floods. It was a severe event, but even then it was only said to be a 1 in 200 year event, which ironically is the standard that we're looking for the Upper Nen. Now, we know for a fact that this is a flood risk area because otherwise the Environment Agency wouldn't ask for a ridiculously high finished flow level. It's now been reduced to 1.15 meters, but we're talking about coming out your front door surrounded by 850 meters, 850 millimeters, 3 feet of water surrounding your property. I mean, is that actually practical? I just can't. How are you supposed to have SUDS work? We're saying it's in flood zone 2, which is a theoretical thing, but this is something that's actually already happened. It's happened already, so it's going to happen again, isn't it? It's 24 years ago. I mean, we're not even talking about climate change. You know, how are SUDS supposed to work? They're in flood zone 3. They're going to be underwater. How are they going to do anything? I worked out with on the basis of a 1.6 meter finished flow level, which is 1.3 meters. And you don't have to be technical for this. I mean, look at your own basic history. Archimedes, Eureka, you get in a full bath, it overflows. Now, the main thing here is the displacement of water, flood water. If we're talking about 850 millimeters of water surrounding on this site without the properties, and we put the properties in there, then it's going to displace a vast quantity of water. Now, Easter 1998 floods, there were 43 properties in Kislingbury flooded internally. And that, again, is from the source that I've quoted before. We shouldn't lose sight of this. I mean, you must care about your residents. Anything that's built on that site is going to make it worse for those properties that already flood in Kislingbury, and it will also add additional properties that will come into the flood risk category. Now, it's not the fault of those properties that flooded, that this falls between the responsibility for, right.
Must stop you there. Thank you very much.
Throw this out with the bathwater, that's what I'd say.
Are there any questions for Mr. Livingston? No? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Now we have our call-in originator, Councillor Adam Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I start, just wish to make clear that I'm here tonight in my capacity as a ward councillor. I've not spoken to any committee member about this application, nor have I applied a party whip of any kind. Just wish to make that clear, because obviously I'm leader of the authority and I don't want any misconceptions to take root. So with that, I'll begin my address to the committee, Chairman. So I think pictures speak 1,000 words, don't they? And we've all seen the harrowing pictures as part of the presentation tonight. So I have significant concerns about this proposal to build 2 properties on a site that lies within flood zone 3. Beach Close and the access road flood regularly, as do significant parts of the north of the village of Kislingbury. Just last week, as we've heard, Kislingbury experienced severe flooding, leading to the closure of the main road for 3 days. This is not an isolated incident, and certainly not a once in 100 or 200 year event. Flooding is a persistent problem in our area, despite the major flood defence work that's already been undertaken. It defies common sense to conclude that more undeveloped land adjacent to a host of properties can be taken away without increasing the flood risk. The evidence was before our eyes only a matter of days ago. The proposed properties would need to be built on land raised by well over a metre above the base level for flood protection. That would result in 2 houses being constructed on artificial plateaus, which is not only visually unappealing, but also impractical. According to paragraph 7.61, vehicle access to these properties would remain in zone 3, meaning there would be no access or egress available when it floods. And that access or egress is important if we consider that emergency vehicle access may be needed to those properties at times. The report suggests, and this is a classic, that occupiers could escape over the short stone wall or seek refuge on the first floor. Are we seriously considering approving a solution that requires potential inhabitants to demonstrate skills more befitting military cadets at Sandhurst, knowing full well that it will be a recurring issue in the future? Moreover, this proposal failed the sequential test, taking no account of impact on emergency services, and provides no justification for placing these properties in an area of flood risk. BN7 of the WNJCS states all new development will need to demonstrate that there is no increased risk of flooding to existing properties, and proposed development is or can be safe and shall seek to improve existing flood risk management. This does not. The condition being recommended for approval, that no building should be occupied, is insufficient because the surface water drainage works will already be in place and the risk to neighbouring properties also in place. In conclusion, approving this proposal would be a grave mistake. You saw the evidence just last week. It disregards the safety and well-being of our community and ignores the ongoing issues with flooding. I urge you to consider these points and those raised by Dr. Hughes and other residents very carefully and reject the beach close proposal under policy BN7 for the sake of Kislingboro's future.
Thank you very much. If you'd remain there in case of questions from members. Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Going back to those pictures, sorry to frustrate officers, can you get the pictures up again? You know your ward, Adam. I'm glad it was in my notes to talk about emergency services because I'm struggling to see where and how they could pass there if there was a concern. My second concern is mobility of residents. Kislingborough is a village. Average age of inhabitants is older. So I think there's a material concern there in terms of landscape approachability and accessibility. On the picture there, where would, in terms of emergency access, is that designed for emergency access? Is that prohibitive in where it is for that?
I mean, I'm probably not qualified to comment on the suitability of emergency access, but clearly the access is via the metal gate, as we can see on the plans. But the quickest route for an ambulance is from Northampton General is over the River Nen Bridge and through the Zone 3 flood area. So that is prohibitive in itself. The diversion route would most likely take an ambulance, many more minutes to reach a resident in that location or any other part of Kislingborough that was affected.
Just to follow up there, would you have concerns around the mobility potentially and the health and safety aspect from the raised platform? It's 3 foot, I think, isn't it? 3 foot. Would you have concerns as a ward councillor with the health and safety around that design?
Yeah, I absolutely would. I think it's instructive that we have a report suggesting escape routes in itself. I don't think I've ever seen something of that nature in a planning application. That suggests to me that there's an acceptance that this property is going to flood, and I think for any of us to accept an application of that nature would be irresponsible.
Mm-hmm. Any further questions for Councillor Brown? Councillor Eastwood.
Yes. Councillor Brown, would you suggest that there is a remedy for this? If you take care of the service water drainage, then you might be able to move on to the project at hand and build subsequently.
As I think we've heard from Dr. Hughes, the flood incidents in Kislingborough are nothing new. I've inquired with the council many times over to look for a potential solution, both with the Environment Agency and our own flood risk team. Mm-hmm. There are investigative works going on at the moment, but the nature of the inadequacy of the drainage system in Kislingborough is so extreme that a solution seems to me to be many years away, unless it appears to be, unless it's far simpler than it actually is. Than it appears to be. But I'm not a drainage expert. I'll keep pushing until it's resolved. But you've heard the history from Dr. Hughes, and you've seen the pictures for yourself. That the issues are real. They're happening more and more often, and as it stands, and we keep hearing from officers for every application that we consider, we can only go on what's before us today. And what's before us today is a flood risk situation in Kislingborough, which is already heightened, which is already of deep concern to residents, and which I would say every person in the village regards as unacceptable. And I would not want to see anything done which adds to that situation, and this certainly will add to it.
Thank you very much.
You could say quod est demonstrand.
Yes. Any further questions for Councillor Brown? No? Thank you very much. Is it appropriate for me to go to the officers now for comments on that? Officers, what do you make of all of that?
So I suppose there's a lot of ground to cover, so I think I'll try and sort of just cover a few points, and then see Nathan or Simon may wish to pitch in. Obviously, just in relation to the type of application, I know there was sort of comments about whether this is an appropriate application, i.e. would it be more appropriate as a full planning application? That's not material here. Obviously, the applicant's entitled to submit an outline application. That's what we have before us. And again, just to quickly cover off the heritage issues, I think they're dealt with fairly robustly in the report. Obviously, conservation and heritage is an issue because it's in the conservation area, therefore sensitive to change. But obviously, heritage is about managing change. So in this sense, yes, the site is open at the moment, but obviously there has been fairly substantial extensions to number 3, I think it's fair to say. Obviously, this has, diminished the amount of open space that's perceptible. Obviously, it's garden land anyway, so obviously the owner of that dwelling would be entitled to erect structures under permitted development, and obviously associated paraphernalia with obviously domestic dwellings. So I think in this case, there's a balance to be struck, as in obviously the open space is important. Probably used to be more important before those structures came there, but it's obviously our view that a sensitively designed development would still preserve the significance of the conservation area and thereby not cause harm, which is the test. So I think I'll just sort of park heritage there. So obviously most of what we've been discussing relates to flooding. Obviously the flood defences have been mentioned. I just wanted to make members aware, because I'm not sure it's been mentioned, but obviously the flood zones designated by the EA don't take into account the flood defences. They're on the basis the flood defences fail. So obviously that's something for members to consider. The issue of the infrastructure of the village, obviously this is a much more significant problem than the scale of this application. So bearing in mind that the EA and Lead Local Flow Authority both don't object, I think this is potentially where some of the member questions were leading, but I think it's our view that it wouldn't be proportionate to basically put the onus on the applicant to resolve long-standing issues in the village. I think what we're seeking to do is making sure the development doesn't worsen the existing situation. Ideally would be a betterment. So obviously flooding, as I mentioned, flooding is an issue in the village. I think, I don't think anyone's pretending that parts of the village don't flood. And obviously there was a significant event in 1998 where greater portions of the village than in the photographs flooded, including the application site. Obviously the view is that was an exceptional event. And typically the site, the site of the dwellings would be.
Will you sit down, please, Councillor Bignell? No. Carry on, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'm just responding to the points that have been raised at the moment. So yeah, it's just I just wanted to obviously make clear that obviously parts of the village flood, including obviously the access, as you can see in the photo. Obviously, there's a flooding issue there. Obviously, the portion of the site where the development would be concentrated is less prone to flooding. And obviously in the photos, obviously you can see that it's not as affected as the areas in flood zone 3. And then finally, the sequential test. Obviously it's set out in the report, but officers' view is that the sequential test has been satisfied by directing development into flood zone 2, which is obviously less prone to flooding, and that was the requirement of the test. So the view of officers has been passed and the exceptions test isn't engaged. And obviously I don't have expertise in flooding, so rely on the input of the lead local flood authority and EA. I think it's just worth mentioning that the lead local flood authority have expressed the view in their final comments. So it's addressed in lead local flood authority concern 1. So they're suggesting that the maximum discharge rate from the site would be equal to Greenfield runoff rates for all storm events. And this would provide a betterment in terms of rates of runoff from the site. So obviously that's the view of the technical experts at the council. So obviously I just wanted to raise that as consideration. But I think that's all I wanted to say in relation to representation so far. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anything else from officers? Okay, I'll move on to our next speaker. So we'll have Ian Mills, the agent for the applicant. Okay. One in the middle, in the base.
Thank you.
Speak when you're ready, please.
Good evening, Chair and councillors. I am Ian Mills, the agent acting on this project, with Mr. Brown, the applicant beside me. This submission is an outline only to establish that the site can be developed for residential homes. Originally, the application was for 3 new homes, and the lead local flood authority, LLFA, accepted this. But following extensive discussions and negotiations, this was reduced to 2 new homes, allowing for more site biodiversity measures to be implemented. This means that the 2 new homes are in flood zone 2 and not zone 3, as may have been suggested. I refer you to point 76 of the Planning Committee report. Most recently, the LFA have confirmed to Wicken Design, who's spoken tonight, and the local planning authority that, I quote, the properties will not have a significant impact on surface water flood risk, as the properties are at low risk of flooding from surface water and there are no notable flow paths across the site. The site is surrounded on all sides by existing development and it is a brownfield site suitable for development under national planning policy. We have fulfilled every technical requirement. We have engaged our own independent experts to provide information to support this application. In particular, flood analysis of the site in accordance with updated legislation. This information has been sent to and supported by both the Environment Agency and the LLFA, both concurring that the details provided meet requirements. The sequential test has been satisfied due to building only in flood zone 2. An exceptions test is not required. I refer you to 7.6 of the Planning Committee report. This site has not flooded since the 1998 floods and the River Nain flood events has been put into position. In addition, Anglian Water have confirmed in writing that there's more than sufficient capacity in the network to take stormwater from the site with a controlled flow rate. The West Northamptonshire Council Heritage Department has no objection to development. Please refer to point 732 of the Planning Committee report. New housing levels will not be 1.5 above existing site level as per the Environment Agents Agreement. Difference from ground level to the proposed finished floor levels we contend is only about 1.17 if you take into consideration the rise or falls of levels across the site. We refer you to our sectional site drawing if necessary. There was also a house approved in Hodges Lane, 100 yards away, in 2022 in flood zone 3, but no objections from anybody. There's also financial consideration relating to community infrastructure levy of an excess of £100,000 from this development. Your officer's report is very thorough. I must commend Mr. Patterson for his professionalism, continued dialogue and advice during the submission period. The recommendation is very clear and all statutory consultees have raised no objections but concur with the reports and evidence we have provided. I thank you for listening to my presentation. And given that we have met the criteria of all current legislation, local and national planning policies, we ask that you consider recommendation of approval and concur with that assessment. Chair, councillors, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Mills? Councillor Barrett-Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this isn't too blunt a question, but why would you build an island to build a property on it? And secondly, are you actually going to get insured in that property afterwards if it's built into a floodplain, flood zone? Thank you.
In that respect, if we look at the consultations we've had with the EEA, LFFA, what we are proposing means that the potential, or actually the risk of flooding in this part of the site is very minimal. No notable flow pass through the site whatsoever. With regard to insurances, with the raised levels of the floor, we are confident and contend that we will not have any flooding on the site. It was mentioned we'll have 850 millimetres of flood water stepping out of the house. If that happened, I think half of Northamptonshire would be underwater.
Any further questions for Mr. Mills? Councillor Clubley.
Yeah, just a bit of clarification, please, on the history of this land. So the application relates to land associated with 3 Hodges Lane. So my understanding is that the property at 3 Hodges Lane has been there for many years, but has been extended over time. So this piece of land that planning permission is sought for, was this previously land that belonged to 3 Hodges Lane? You said that it's a greenfield site, or was it a separate parcel of land, or did it belong to 3 Hodges Lane?
The whole rear area was in ownership of 3 Hodges Lane and was used as a part of the enjoyment of that property. I think it's a bit of a small holding. I'm not sure the exact use of the land, but it is a brownfield site. It was used for other purposes by the owners previously of number 3 Hodges Lane.
And does Mr. Brown own 3 Hodges Lane?
Yes, we have extended and altered and completed the project. So it is now actually going to be on the market for sale. So yes, Mr. Brown currently does own that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Barrett. Councillor Connolly.
Hi, I just wanted to check. I think you said that 1998 was a last major flood. It's just that I did used to live in Mill Lane about 15 years ago, and I can tell you down the bottom of that, I mean, there's some lovely houses down there, lovely cottages. I used to feel sorry for them, but they were flooded quite a few times by the time I was there. So it might have been a major flood 1998, but I'm just saying about 15 years ago, I mean, there's a bridge down the bottom of Mill Lane, you can cross over it. That was completely over the top of it. It was all those houses were all flooded out. The bridge, I think, coming into the Cromwell pub, I think they closed that. So I was just saying, I don't know what the extent of a major flood is, but I'm just saying that was quite it is quite bad down there. It is.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pritchard.
With regards to the photographs there, I see that there's a significant amount of, was it additional topsoil that's been put in there?
No, there is no additional topsoil being put into the site. What's happened is obviously the scrubland has been removed, and obviously there's been no import of any topsoil whatsoever into the site, and there will be no import of topsoil if this development was actually to go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Randall, did you have a question? Okay. Any further questions? of the agent? No? Thank you very much. Mr. Woods?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate to the committee that insurance is not a material planning consideration. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett, sorry.
You starting the debate?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this from an officer perspective, and hearing the presentation, very detailed, and the questions you've answered. Thank you for that. It's been good to hear a cross section of people coming in to speak as well. I've got significant concerns around the flooding aspect. I'm fully aware, and I've read the report, LLFA. I'm fully accepting of what they're saying from a authority perspective, but we have, and our residents have suffered flooding here historically, and 9 days ago, to the degree that, you know, you couldn't walk through without wellies on. My other concern, significant concern, is we're pitching potentially 3 foot up, that accessibility for people, for example, residents who may become disabled during their time there, or children, etc. When I think Councillor Brown said, when you're talking about escape routes from houses, I think for me that jumps off the page, that we need to stop what we're doing and look again. The images were very stark for me, and I cannot support that, because from a flood perspective, and hearing what Councillor Colony has just said as well, we've got a moral obligation to, from my perspective, as well as we've got a principal planning one here from a flood zone. We've got a moral obligation to ensure safety of residents, and consciously, as well as from a point of view from a floodplain. I absolutely will not be supporting this, and my recommendation is to go against officer advice.
Thank you. Councillor Randall?
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Barrett beat me to the proposal. I mean, I don't feel that it meets our policy BN7. You know, I feel really sorry for the people living in the village and having to keep enduring that time after time. It clearly, you know, it may be a flood zone 2, but there's only a flood zone 1, 2 and 3. And this is clearly highly at, you know, of risk of regular flooding, as we've already heard. And even though that house may not flood, I believe that by tarmacking over that area, that will cause a significant increase to flooding to other properties.
Thank you. Councillor Pritchard?
Thank you, Chair. If I may say, I think this is a totally inappropriate site. I think when you look at the photographs, and I think events have actually overtaken us, because when you look at the history of the flooding that's actually taken on this site, and at the same token, when you look at the flooding that actually is to the entrance, with regards to access for emergency vehicles, etc., you know, I'm sure that would have an enormous problem. But so therefore, I actually feel that we should actually reject this outline application, and I would like to make that as a proposal.
Thank you very much. Do we have a second? Councillor Barrett? Officers?
Chair, I think the reason for refusal, in the sense that you're looking at the risk and you want to take a precautionary approach, is you just go with the NPPF guidance and the NPPG guidance and say the sequential test hasn't been satisfied in your judgment, and that there's too much development here in flood zone 2 and flood zone 3. Admittedly, the sequential approach within the site has been applied because they've avoided flood zone 3, but the guidance does talk about applying a sequential test to flood zones 2 and 3 anyway. So I think there's enough in there without having to go into any technical aspects, because the sequential test is a policy tool. It's not a technical tool. That's why you don't have any objections from the LLFA and the Environment Agency. That's not their job. the policy tool is you want to direct development outside flood risk areas, and that's what the sequential test is for. They have done a sequential test. Officers have given a view on it. Your view is that you need to be more hypersensitive to that. So I think your refusal reason is clearly set out in the NPPG and the NPPF about inadequacy of this sequential test for flood zone 2 and 3.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, I'd like to add as well, I don't think we can condition anything that can go against the refusal. I think as Councillor Randall talks about, any form of tarmac or any more raising, you know, we'll be building a castle on a moat, and you know, that analogy, we can't condition it. So hence bypassing the condition to refusal for me.
Mr. Loud.
Yeah, through you, Chair, obviously from discussions that I've heard and the debate, I see two potential reasons for refusal from the councillors from the debate and discussions that have been had. One is regards to unsafe egress from the site in the event of a flooding. And then the other reason would be with regards to the actual design, that the mitigation proposed would result in a contrived design development, which would be contrary to policy SS2 with regards to general principles and design.
Thank you. That's exactly what you had in mind.
Could I actually
Councillor Pritchard?
add on with regards to it hasn't met the sequential tests?
Can we add that?
So that'll be an additional, so we're looking at three reasons for refusal, are we? One relating to unsafe egress from the site in the event of a flooding, one relating to the fact that it hasn't passed the sequential test, and the third relating to design.
Yes. Thank you. Any other views on this? Are we ready to move to a vote? Can you confirm that for us, please, Mr. Woods?
Thank you, Chair. So in summary, it's been proposed by Councillor Ken Pritchard and seconded by Councillor Harry Barrett that you are refusing this application contrary to the officer's advice for the following reasons. Unsafe access and egress from the site in the event of flooding. The mitigation proposed would result in a contrived development contrary to policy SS2 with regards to the general principles of the design. And refusal reason number 3 is that the application has not met any of the sequential tests. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All those in favour of that, please show. We're unanimous. Thank you. The application is refused. Thank you very much. Item 10, Unit A1, 1 to 5 Fairground Way, Northampton. Mr.
Chair, I don't know from a legal perspective, but when you think we've got still two applications on it, is there any possibility that we could adjourn and then hear these at the next available date? Because, you know, we're talking now about 20 to 10.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. There is no guillotine for this committee. We still have two applications before us, and adjourning the meeting would require us to fix a date and time to hold another or to continue this meeting. Adjourning this meeting does not conclude this meeting. It simply defers the rest of the meeting. We'd have to fix another date and time. We do have two applications before us. And we will try and get through those as expeditiously as we can.
But when you think of it, Chair, you know, we're in a situation now where it's going to be past 10 o'clock and we've actually been sitting since 6 o'clock, which is 4 hours. And I'm sure that some of my colleagues actually will feel that they're a little bit tired. You know, so anyway.
I'd just like a cup of tea. I would just. My only comment is that I think people work better under better conditions, and I always say this to everyone. I just really like a cup of tea, Chair, and that would just move me along rather than a cup of cold water with a tea bag. Thank you, Chair. It will be cold. I'll continue with water.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this short. An application for Riverside Retail Park Northampton for the former home base site, which has been vacant for the last few weeks. External alterations and reconfiguration of the unit to facilitate subdivision, including extensions and alteration to service yard arrangements. The plan in front of you shows a site location plan with the site edged in red. That's situated a few kilometres to the east of Northampton Town Centre. Again, the block plan in front of you, another block plan proposed. This is the existing ground floor plan, which is to be subdivided. The unit is to be occupied by Wix and another bulky goods operator if permitted. Another floor plan that shows the subdivision and the works associated, which including the reports include glazing, new shop fronts, composite cladding, extension. This is the elevational plan that shows the existing property. And again, the proposed elevations which show the extent of the works proposed. None of the consultees objected. There's been no neighbour objections. And the application is recommended for approval as per the report. This is the photographs of the site, taken at the front of the property, the existing car parking arrangement, some of the restaurants on the left-hand side, Frankie's and Benny's restaurant, home-based unit on the right-hand side, taken from the car park. And again, the front and rear of the site. Thank you. This, yeah.
Thank you. I will keep it very brief as well, given the time. Good evening. My name is Kyril Malkin. I'm a partner at Montague Evans, and I'm here as the agent for the application. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As explained by Jonathan in the presentation and the committee report.
Yeah,
Sorry.
move the mic closer,
Sorry.
please.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Right, as explained by your officers in a presentation and the committee report, this is a very straightforward planning application. The proposals include the refurbishment and external alterations to the existing vacant unit and minor extensions at the rear of the unit. It will allow the former home base to be subdivided into two separate units and reoccupied for continued retail use. Home base vacated the retail unit a few weeks ago and the application in front of you this evening will allow approximately half the unit to be occupied by Wix, continuing the DIY retail offer at Riverside Retail Park. A separate planning application has been submitted to the council in relation to the second unit. The proposals will deliver a significant number of employment opportunities. It is anticipated that the Wix store will employ approximately 45 full-time and part-time members of staff. Further additional jobs will be created once the adjoining unit is also occupied. As mentioned, this is a straightforward application and we hope that members will support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Malkin? No? Thank you very much. Any questions for officers? No? Views on this? Was that a question to officers? No. Views on the application? Councillor Randall.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I know the site, and it's being sold. We've got people moving in, so it's all good. So I'm happy to propose that we accept officers' advice and recommend this application.
Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, happy to second that. I think we need to reuse as much space as possible and contribute to Northampton economy. I think position of the Wixes as well will be needed for the area as well. So I think geographically it's appropriate as well. So happy to second.
Thank you very much. Does anyone wish to speak? Mr. Woods, will you read the recommendation, please?
Thank you, Chair. A short summary. It's proposed by Councillor Randall and seconded by Councillor Barrett to accept the officer's recommendations as detailed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. All those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Thank you very much. And finally, item 11, land to the rear of 14 Birds Hill Road, Eastcote. Sharmal London, please.
Good evening all. Just one point of clarification in regard to paragraph 5.1, which refers to the consultee comments. It states that the Highways Authority comments refers to the A5 and Longcroft Lane. The actual comments should refer to Birds Hill Road. I will summarize those comments within my presentation. Okay, so if we can please note that this application is for permission in principle, and as per the Town and Country Planning Permission in Principle Order 2017 is amended, decision makers can only assess matters relating specifically to the location, the land use, and the amount of development being proposed. No other planning matters may be considered as part of this application. The application comes before a committee as it would lead to a departure from the local plan in that the application seeks to approve dwellings outside of the confine. This is a red outline of the application site and to the right is an indicative proposed site layout. The application site relates to a parcel of land located to the rear of 14 Birds Hill Road. The site was previously used as a builder's yard adjacent to the settlement boundary of Eastcote, and as such is previously developed land, which is referred to as brownfield site. Site, as aforementioned, is outside of the confine. However, access would be taken from within. The site is surrounded by residential dwellings to the north and the east and fields to the west. To the south of the site lies tall hedgerows, which buffer the view of the site from Birds Hill Road. The site is located within proximity of a public right of way, allowing future occupiers to traverse into the settlement, where they would have access to public services such as a public house and a shop. As such, the site is considered to be in a sustainable location. Please note, no plans are required or have been submitted as part of this application, other than a location plan and an indicative layout plan. The applicant is only required to submit a location plan and a lower and upper range of dwellings being proposed, which they have done. This application is for permission in principle for 1 to 2 dwellings on the site. In regard to consultations, the parish council was consulted and they raised an objection regarding highways impact to an unmade road and the site being located outside of the confine. Officers, as I aforementioned earlier, officers wish to clarify paragraph 5.1 of the officer's report. As a point of correction, the local highways authorities, when consulted, acknowledged that the private drive already serves 8 dwellings, and this application proposes an additional 2. They raised no objection. However, they did note that additional information would be required. However, this could be dealt with at technical consent stage, which in essence would be a part 2 application were this application to be approved. A number of objections were received from neighbors, namely in regards to highways safety impact and the access road and development and overdevelopment of that road. Officers note these matters, however, they would be referred to a technical consent stage. Additional objections were raised in regard to residential amenity, character and appearance, archaeology and biodiversity. However, these matters would all be referred to a technical consent stage. A late comment was received from Councillor Anne Addison, and she basically echoed the objection from the parish council, and she reiterated the residents' concerns in regard to highways impact, and also noted that their application should be refused.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we now have Iris Illingworth on behalf of the parish council to speak to us. Thank you for staying.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Iris Illingworth, representing Partishall Parish Council, who object to the application on the following grounds. The site is situated outside the parish settlement and confines of Eastcote Village. This is contrary to the policy of the adopted local plan. In consultation with residents for the local plan, the parish deemed that the integrity of the 3 villages comprising the parish should be maintained within the open countryside, allowing green spaces in between to avoid merging of the villages. Approval of this application would set a precedent for any future developments outside the confines and go against the local plan. Previous refusals for development of this site have been due to an unjustifiable extension of the existing development of Eastcote. If this site is deemed to be within open countryside, then according to the local plan, it is only acceptable if it is an isolated home. This would not be an isolated development. As to whether the site can be described as previous developed land, it is not known if a business was established at the site or if it was just a small storage area with a shed. It is questionable as to whether the site would be infill, as the building line appears at least 25 metres beyond the existing properties, accessed by a narrow lane. Understood, the maximum number of permitted developments on a private driveway is 5. There are already 8 developments. Further developments would affect access and services to the detriment of the existing ones. As the housing supply in this area has already been met, this proposal conflicts with the policy R1 for rural areas, which states there should be contribution to retention or improvement of local services. Granting permission for this development on this site is unlikely to provide this. Finally, the access to the land is in close proximity to the two adjacent properties and would impinge on their privacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Illingworth? No, thank you very much. Well, we now have Jim Pratt, a local resident, to speak to us. Press the button and please start when you're ready.
With reference to the WNC planning report, section 5.1 suggests that WNC highways offer no objection. I do not agree. They specifically recommend a limit of 5 houses to be accessed via an unmade road. We are already 8. Section 7.3 states that the existing shared track to be capable of accommodating 2-lane traffic. This is simply not the practical reality when 1 lane is parked cars. Moreover, the only way to access Birds Hill Road with any visibility, particularly of the pavement, is to drive in the middle of the track. Additionally, there is no space to turn vehicles on the bridleway. Delivery lorries and vans often reverse around the blind corner to rejoin Birds Hill Road. Inevitably, additional vehicles will exacerbate this. However, it is the additional access track between numbers 12 and 14 which is the greater safety concern. This track is the only pedestrian and vehicular access for the 2 proposed properties. It is restricted to a width of 3 metres for a length of 25 metres. Larger vehicles will not be able to turn around and will have to reverse the 25 metres. The width precludes safe pedestrian access down that drive. There will be queuing to access the properties at this bottleneck. 10 metres of the track sits hard against the building of number 14. Its foundations are unsuitable for larger vehicles to run alongside it. There will be damage to number 14. Vehicles have no visibility around the corner of number 14 of the front door, nor pedestrians in that area. I ask you also to note that there are neighbours' children using the existing bridleway to get to the village and the school. Section 7.31 suggests that much weight is given to the fact that the site was a builder's yard and that there is no expected increase to existing traffic. Factually, it was a yard owned by a builder, but I can say since 2001, the only person regularly accessing that site was the owner, Robert Hart, and this was limited to a single visit at either end of the working day. He retired 10 years ago. Since then, it has been used as a garage, to garage a camper van and otherwise store building materials. Section 7.15. The site is considered previously developed land on the basis of being a builder's yard and that there was a permanent fixed structure for a number of years. I'd ask you to note that the permanent structure is a corrugated iron agricultural shed with an earth floor. Section 7.21. The proposed development will be capable of environmental improvements via the use of PDL. This land was previously used as a garden by the Hart family prior to its use as storage. It has some MOT type 1 providing hard standing and which has now become overgrown through neglect. I do not recognise any biodiversity gain in converting this piece of land to a building plot. In summary, my position is this is not a brownfield site that will benefit from development. The new buildings are entirely outside the parish boundary. It does not offer safe access either to new owners or existing neighbours. In fact, it introduces new risk and exacerbates existing risk. This is not a sustainable location. The nearest supermarket is 4 miles away in Towcester. There is no shop in Eastcote. If this permission is granted at this stage, the land will be sold at a price reflecting this, and the new owner will presume that
Thank
it
you,
will be
Mr.
granted.
Platt. I must stop you there. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Platt? No? Thank you very much. We now have Carl Richardson, a local resident. Yeah, you've been very patient. Is the microphone on?
The lane, the width of it is 3.1 meters. That's 10 feet. It finishes 25 meters further down towards the end of our properties. And it's on a slope. A car going through this gap of 3.1 meters will be able to open the driver's door. They won't really be able to open the passenger door. A transit van will be able to slip, the driver will be able to slip out just in case and bang himself against the wall. Yeah. And he won't be able to move any further. Larger vans, like a Luton truck, will be dragging their wing mirrors against number 14 and against number 12. In addition, the poor people that this house or houses actually applicated for, they'll have to drag their wheelie bin something like 30 meters up the slope. That distance needs 0.7 meters for the access to the wheelie bin. If there's a wheelchair access needed, which I'm sure should be in the plans, that needs 0.9 meters. This means that people dragging, the wheelie bins up there will become conflicted with vans, cars, and everything going down. This is only an express single track. It's just dangerous. Also, an oil delivery van, an oil delivery lorry, it needs 3.6 meters. The gap is only 3.1. A fire engine needs 3.7 meters. Again, the gap is only 3.1. Going further to at the top of the lane between 14 and 12, we have an oil tank. Further down, we have a boiler right next to the fence. Given the acute turn into the lane, I consider this dangerous. It's actually quite frightening. Also,
thank you very much. I must stop you there. Are there any questions for Mr. Richardson? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Officer, is there anything heard you want to come back on?
Yes, I think we should note that we've taken into consideration all of the comments in regard to biodiversity, in regard to highways, in regard to the pull distance of the bins. However, at this stage, these matters cannot be taken into consideration. At this stage, we can only assess the location, the land use, and the amount of development that is proposed. As such, these matters that are mentioned, namely in regard to highways, they would be referred to a technical consent stage. I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but they've in line with recent appeal decisions, inspectors have noted that in regard to permission in principle applications, it would not be reasonable to take into consideration highways impact, as that could be dealt with at technical design consent stage. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to the speakers, I have a written address that I've received from Councillor Anne Addison that has been requested to be read out, who is the local ward member, one of the local ward members for Bugbrook. I will start the statement. I would like to support the parish council and its residents in their objections to this application. The application is outside of the parish settlement confines and appears to be filling a gap between two confines. I'm given to understand that the maximum number of properties permitted from a single private driveway or road is 5, There are already more than 5 dwellings accessing this privately owned gravel driveway. There is also an outstanding planning matter relating to the gravel driveway, which still must be addressed to prevent the gravel from spilling onto the public highway of Birds Hill Road. And that is the end of Councillor Anne Addison's statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Views from members? Councillor Eastwood?
I don't know how to put this as a question. I went to look at this site today. I happened to be in the village at any rate, but I went to look at the site. Shmal, I have a great deal of respect for you, but I have to say, it looked like Piccadilly Circus and vast congestion. And I didn't realize that you could only have 5 units off that particular pathway or road or whatever you call it. But it's quite difficult to see how you could possibly tick the box unless you can show me how.
Yeah, sure. I think the point that you trying to make is that highways are saying that with this unmade road, only 5 dwellings should use it, be able to use it. And currently there are 8 dwellings there, and this application proposes 2, which would result in 10. However, that is a highways concern, and that cannot be taken into consideration at this particular application. In line with the Town and Country Planning Act, permission in principle 2017 as amended, as aforementioned, I can only decision makers, officers can only refer to the location, the land use, and the amount of development that is proposed.
Thank you.
May I suggest that the land use is overused?
Just to come in as well, whilst we are looking at permission in principle and therefore highways and access isn't a matter to consider at this stage, as part of the technical detail stage, if we considered that access was unsafe and indeed highways, there was an objection from highways, then that would be a reason to refuse the application at the technical detail stage. But at this stage and the permission in principle, all we're looking at is the land use, location, and the quantum of development.
Councillor Pritchard, is it a question?
It is a question. It also is a statement. And with regards to the officer concerned, it's inappropriate for you actually to mention appeal decisions to adjacent properties. So therefore, that will not influence whatsoever this particular committee. I would also like to say, is it 1 or 2 houses? You know, it can't be a situation either 1 or 2. It's either 1 or it's either 2.
In line with permission in principle applications, the applicant is only required to give a lower and upper range of dwellings. In this instance, they are proposing 1 to 2. So they can actually give the range.
And what if they say 3 to 4?
Permission would be for 1 to 2, councillor.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Sharps?
Yes, I'm disappointed to see that this is sort of outside our local plan. But I'm really quite confused by a statement in here where it's amusing but wrong. It's a departure from our general thrust in the local plan. Can somebody explain that to me? Because what does that mean? So today we're going to let this happen and we're going to have 1 to 2 properties here, but maybe in another village with a different village hierarchy where we're less concerned that they meet together, we won't, because that's what I'm reading from this document. You know, that's where I'm coming from. So what do you mean by the thrust section of this?
Yeah, sure. The general thrust of the local plan is to direct development to within the confines and more sustainable locations. Applications are assessed on a case-by-case basis. In this instance, in this particular instance, it is considered because of the application site being regarded as being a sustainable location, and the fact that it would result in redevelopment of previously developed land as per the definition of the MPPF. the application is considered acceptable in this instance. That does not mean that in every instance it would be acceptable.
But can I ask then, sorry, but it flies in the face of the fact that we try and protect rural settlements from connection. And so can you explain to me then why we're allowing it here? But it does actually basically connect the two areas more than it should, because we're trying to make sure that we don't do that with villages in little areas. We don't want pieces of land to then become just one subsection of another area. And that's really important in rural areas.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify with members, and I appreciate that the planning officer may wish to respond to your query as well, Councillor Sharps. Just in terms of permission in principle, I thought it's helpful if we just go through the guidance a little bit on it, because it's not something that comes to committee on a very regular basis. This is our second application that I'm aware of. So just on the guidance side of it, the permission and principal consent route is an alternative way of obtaining planning permission for housing-led development, and it separates consideration of matters of principle for proposed development from the technical detail of the development. So the permission and principal consent has two stages, as is set out in the report. First stage is permission in principle to establish whether a site is suitable. And the second is a technical detail stage when the detailed development proposals are assessed. So it's a little bit different to what we've tended to deal with at committee. Just in terms of the technical details consent, following a grant of permission in principle, the site must receive a grant of technical details consent before development can proceed. So there is additional provisions when we get to a technical details application where we can consider more information and the wider application information.
May I answer that? Once it gets past this stage, it's carried. And so the
It's a
questions
principle, rather like an outline consent would in principle agree to a development, but it doesn't categorically at that point grant a permission, a detailed permission, but it is literally, as it says, it's an in principle consent that the proposals in principle, without trying to overuse that word, are acceptable. But that is obviously, of course, subject then to the detailed application stage.
Is there anything that planning officers would wish to add?
Coming back to your point, Councillor Sharps, you asked the question of why do we consider this application to be acceptable in this location? I mean, we consider it to be a sustainable location because it does adjoin the settlement boundary, and there is actually a public right of way which would allow future occupiers to traverse into the settlement confine.
Any further questions of officers?
Is there no
Views?
condition when you can't turn a car around?
At permission in principle applications, we will not be allowed to attach conditions. However, at technical consent stage, which is part 2 application, yes, we can attach conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Just one for the debate, so it's not a question, but.
Right, have we finished with the questions? Councillor Randall?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is me just not really quite understanding. So if we went against officers' advice because we felt that the road wasn't suitable, we couldn't do that. Is that right?
No. No. You'd have to have a reason.
What, that the road isn't you haven't got suitable access to get to the
No,
property?
that's considered at a later stage in the process.
Right, okay, so, I'm just looking at previous refusals then. And obviously it is outside the confines of the parish, so does that not account to anything anymore then?
These don't appear to be applications for permission in principle.
So have we got anything, is there any reason then?
Through you, Chair, the reason why this application has come to committee is because it is a departure from the development plans. So we recognise that it's outside the settlement boundary and we wouldn't usually permit housing of this type. But there are site specific circumstances, including the fact that it's previously developed land and its location immediately abutting the settlement boundary makes it a sustainable location. So there are mitigating factors which we consider on balance makes this acceptable in terms of the use of the land.
Okay, then can I ask then, were all those other houses built when it was being used previously? Because if it was the only property or only 2 or 3 along there, and now since there's been significant build since then that has changed the optics of what it was previously.
I wouldn't be able to comment on the previous applications. I mean, they're going back to 1981, 1982. And obviously all we can do is assess the development on our current development plan, as well as the MPPF. And you know, we recognise that it goes against the development plan. That's why it's a departure from the development plan. But as I've said, there are mitigating circumstances that we consider warrant an approval of permission in principle.
Okay. I think we're done with the questions now, Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, I think the issues we've heard are going to be raised at that next stage. So my recommendation is we go with officer advice.
Thank you. Do I take that as a proposal? Yep. Do we have a seconder? I'll second it. Does anyone wish to speak?
May I make a comment? I think we're wasting our time, and that's only because I've been there today.
Thank you. Can you use your mic, please?
I wouldn't support that proposal whatsoever. To my view, this definitely sits outside the confines of the village in open countryside, and I won't support that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yep. Can you summarise that, please, Mr. Woods?
Thank you, Chair. We have a proposal to accept the officer's recommendations from Councillor Harry Barrett, and it's seconded by yourself, Chair.
Does anyone wish to speak before I take the vote? All those in favour, please show. You got that? Yep. Those against? Thank you very much. Any abstentions? Thank you. Mr. Woods?
Thank you, Chair. So that motion is lost. So we'll now require an alternative proposal from the committee. Thank you.
Committee? Over to you. Councillor Randall, no?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll propose that we refuse the application because we feel that it does sit outside the confines of the parish. And it could lead to overdevelopment on the site. I'm trying to think of anything else. Because I don't know now, because it's confused me of what I can refuse
Yeah,
it.
Councillor Bagot-Webb.
I made a point that, yes, it's outside the confines, but it's already outside the confines for 6. So I think we're going to lose an appeal very rapidly on that. If it wasn't there, I'd agree. There's 6 going to 8.
Officers?
Through you, Chair. So obviously what I've heard from members is a potential refusal for the reasons that it's outside the settlement confines. I would urge caution with regards to refusing it on the grounds of overdevelopment, considering that this proposal is for 1 or 2 dwellings. So I would err caution on refusing it on overdevelopment.
Okay. So can I put that to the vote?
We need a refusal reason.
Oh, so we've lost the whole. Yeah, we need a reason for refusal. Officers have some advice.
So from what I've heard from members, if you are minded to refuse the application, it would be for reasons that the site is outside of the settlement confines and there is no rural exception which would allow this type of development outside of the settlement confines and within the open countryside, and therefore it'd be contrary to policy SS1.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I've just written down.
So who's proposing
I'll
that?
propose that.
Shall I summarise, Chair?
Yeah, go on.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So the proposal from Councillor Wendy Randall and as seconded by Councillor Maggie Clubley earlier on is that permission for this application be refused for a single refusal reason on the grounds that the application site is outside the village confines, and owing to there being no rural exception on this site, it would be contrary to policy SS1 of the Part 2 local plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak? Oh, all those in favour of the proposal, please show. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. And with that,
Chair, before we close the meeting, could I actually recommend to Development Control and the Head of Development Control that actually at the next committee meeting, we have more, shall we say, the amount of agenda items. When you think in the past, we've had one, we've had cancelled, we've had no problems whatsoever with regards to it. And then all of a sudden we get, 7 or 8 applications. So therefore, surely we can actually even them out a wee bit so that we can actually give it due consideration to all of the applications.
yes, I agree, and we'll discuss this in our next chairman's briefing. Thank you. And with that,
But just difficulty with that is that we've got statutory targets. Applicants aren't always going to agree extensions of time for the convenience of the committee. You're going to get congestion from time to time because people are going to say, you can't delay my planning application. I'm not going to give you an extension of time. If you don't, I'm going to appeal non-determination. So all of those things. I appreciate today was a long one. And also we had almost like a double committee because you had Nikki Scaife's team and then the normal South team. So I appreciate that. We'll do our best to even it out, but it's not always possible because we're always under pressure to get them to you as quickly as we can from the applicants.
thank you very much.
Chair, if I may, thank you very much to all the officers and yourself. But if I could ask through you, Chair, could we just please go back to council and just explain that 6 o'clock is not an adequate time for this committee, and that the previous 2 o'clock was a more adequate time?
Oh, the officers would second that for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Well,
close the meeting. I can't get to it. Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just to reiterate that the meeting start time was a decision taken by council, and that is a political decision, and members should pursue that through the appropriate channels should they wish to revisit that. Thank you, Chair.
Item 12, it's urgent business, and you'll be pleased to hear that there is none. So I close the meeting at 10, what time is it? 20. Thank you very much.
It's like an announcement.